One of the biggest challenges that retirees face is knowing how to put that income plan in place. Where's that money coming from? How much you need to be pulling out every single month? And look, the rule for the longest time has been the 4% rule. You probably heard about it. But Morningstar says that actually might be costing retirees money. We're going to explain why next. Welcome into All Things Retirement. Ben George with Anthony Aulffo. He is a certified financial planner and the founder of the Cardinal Wealth Group. And we get into retirement, Anthony. You got to create that paycheck on your own, which is a big challenge for a lot of people that try to do it on their own. But hey, for the longest time, we've been able to rely on this 4% rule that's been around. But it looks like that may be a little bit more outdated at this point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I sat through, and they've been testing this 4% rule over the last 30 years and, have been tweaking the model as what it's based on and can we spend more and stuff like that. And they've come up with, different ways to do it, going back 20 years and certainly in every year they're testing this and ways that you could, potentially spend more and not leave, let's say, more money on the table than you could have otherwise had spent, which, being able to spend more allows you to do more things. And so Morningstar had a conference that I attended that basically talked about 8 other strategies that advisors could use to help their clients kind of maximize their spending without running out of money, in different ways to do it. And I sat through it and think about having a podcast on it. But then I saw the Financial Advisor magazine where it highlighted this research project that they did. And so I was like, why don't we talk about it today?
Yeah, we're going to drop that link in the show notes too if you want to check it out for yourself. But let's just kind of start a little background on the 4% rule. I think we kind of just assume most people know about it, but just kind of give us a simple breakdown of kind of how it works. And I know it's been around for over 30 years now, right?
Yeah. So basically the idea is like, how much money can I spend until I run out of money? And an MIT aerospace engineer by Bill Bengen, if I'm saying that correctly, I guess he was getting to retirement and kind of had the question himself, and just being an analytical person said, well, let me spend some of my time to figure out this. And basically the gist of it is he came up with a safe withdrawal rate where you wouldn't run out of money after a 30-year period of time. And he came up with the 4% rule, but basically says that, say you have $1 million, you would start off withdrawing 4%, and that 4% would gradually increase every year on an inflation adjusted basis. So if inflation was 3%, you'd add 3% onto your $40,000 withdrawal, and that would slightly go up every single year based off of the inflation rate, without taking really into consideration how well the market's doing, good or bad. The 4% became that safe withdrawal max that most people could do if they had a balanced portfolio, like 50% stock, 50% bonds type of thing, that they wouldn't run out of money after a 30-year period of time. So that's kind of the gist of it. And basically Morningstar was saying, and this is not new, but they just kind of had a research project that they wanted to highlight this to advisors who wanted to participate, that, there are better ways of doing it beyond just putting a specific percentage on it.
Okay. Yeah. Some good background on kind of what people have followed for the longest time, but I'm curious kind of what Morningstar found here, because again, we're all looking to make sure that we're, taking as much money out, not running out of money. There's a lot that goes into this. So what did Morningstar find?
Yeah. And before we go further, I think we're going to highlight some things in terms of different withdrawal rates. I think it's still important to advocate that you should probably do this with a financial professional that focuses on this, that can walk you through this, because when you talk about your age at which you're retiring, right? Maybe you have a 40-year retirement window, or maybe you're a little bit older and starting retirement later and you only have a 15 or 20-year window, or you have a legacy goal where you want to leave a certain amount of money behind or a certain risk tolerance. These things can easily shift this withdrawal number. So I think it's important to not get glued to anything we're saying that your situation is unique from others, but we're just kind of taking this as from like a benchmark study based off of their findings. And basically the gist of it is that, the 4% rule could have some flaws in the sense that people don't spend the way the 4% rule is telling you to spend. So, we'll use $1 million portfolio, 4% is $40,000, and it gets a little bit higher withdrawal based off of with inflation, not taking into consideration how well your portfolio is performing. But other studies have shown that we don't generally just keep spending more and more in retirement. Actually, it starts to level up and even maybe dip towards the later years. It's kind of this go-go years in early retirement in your 60s and 70s, and then to slow go years, which might be from like say 75 to 85, where you're still active but not quite as active, to the what they'll call the no-go years, which maybe is 85 and later, where you're not doing as many things and you're not spending as much. So those are that's one of the things where the 4% rule maybe doesn't quite match up to what the reality is of how we actually go through retirement. So the other ways, and I'm going to break this down into, there was 8. I'm only going to highlight the top 3 alternatives, but I would say that, again, I would advocate working with an advisor who focuses on this, because, there's mistakes can cost you a lot of money. But there are ways where a do-it-yourselfer could possibly do this if they're kind of math inclined and are pretty well on top of this. But we know just from working with people that that's not their thing. It's like how I feel going to the mechanic and them just talking to me about things within the engine. I don't understand any of it, and it's something that I would just obviously let the mechanic do. But the gist of it is basically the 4% rule. If done in one of these other 3 ways, you're leaving money on the table that you could have otherwise spent or enjoyed in retirement and still not ran out of money. So basically, a lot of the starting withdrawal rates, instead of 4%, have put it north of 5, between 5.1 to 5.7%. So using that same math, you could spend, in this $1 million portfolio example, somewhere between $350,000 to $400,000 more throughout your retirement, which is an additional 31% in this $1 million example over a 30-year period of time. So that's nothing to stop at. That's a sizable amount of money. And they also talked about other factors that's certainly important that you need to consider: Social Security, retirement, pension, your situation, inflation, long-term care costs, your investment style. So the general thing was kind of more of a balanced portfolio, had the strongest outcome, which would be somewhere between 30 to 60% equities. And so the 3 other ways are, number 1, a higher constant percentage. So the 4% rule uses 4% and then doesn't look at your portfolio and just adds inflation, and it gets a little gradually more higher every year. The constant percentage, which is one way, starts off with a 5.7% withdrawal rate. So it's much higher, but the way that it works is that you're just taking 5.7% of whatever your account balance is at the beginning of the year. It doesn't incorporate inflation. It's just the account, it's based off of the account value. So you just, instead of a dollar specific, it's using that percentage. So 1 million times 5.7 would be, $57,000 that you would start off with. And then you would look at your portfolio the next year and just times it by 5.7%. Running all the different Monte Carlo situations, which factors in good and bad markets. And that's how they model these scenarios to figure out whether or not they would work. Showed that no one ever ran out of money by doing this in over the last 100 years. Your worst case scenario was basically that if you started at 57,000, you had a bad market. The worst case scenario is that you had to basically go down to 90% of what you originally started off with. So whatever 90% is of 57,000, that would have kind of been the worst case scenario if the portfolio had dropped. But on all those scenarios, everybody, enjoyed a lot more spending than they would have had they just used the 4% rule. I think this is probably the easiest one for, say, a do-it-yourselfer that could kind of implement by just taking, 5.7% of what they're looking to spend and of their nest egg and come up with their distribution for that year. The second one, a little bit more complex, but again, starts off at 5.7% withdrawal rate, takes the 10-year average of your portfolio and applies that 10-year average. So year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. You take the kind of that rolling average and you apply 5.7% to that, and you keep, tweaking it along the way. So you're not really getting into the weeds of, necessarily one year to the next. If you have a really good year or a bad year, it's kind of being averaged out from over a 10-year period of time. This is called the endowment distribution strategy. It's kind of what like college, like Harvard's and Stanford's would use to fund their needs to, expand their, pay for all the different things that their endowments pay for. This is the way that they would do it. Kind of smooths out the volatility. And again, it has the same starting point as 5.7. So I do think that this is something a do-it-yourselfer could possibly implement. I still think the constant percentage is a little bit easier. And then lastly, this is kind of the way that we typically do it here, is the probability-based guardrails. So the difference here is that you kind of need financial software for this. It basically runs the Monte Carlo simulation every year. Again, that's just running thousands of iterations of good and bad markets and kind of coming up with the probability of success. And if we're keeping the probability of success somewhere between 75% to 100%, you can keep increasing your spending as long as you're somewhere in between that. If you drop below 75% success, then you would have to drop your spending a little bit to get it back in line to above 75%. If it stays above those numbers, you can continue to increase it every year. That had the highest paycheck over the 30-year period among all 8 options that were available. And that's exactly what we do here. That's the way that we handle people's retirement income, is that we test it with the Monte Carlo and come up with a number from a starting standpoint, obviously factoring all their other goals and concerns that they want to have, and basically are able to test it, every year to make sure that they're staying on track.
And that's a big deal. I mean, obviously you don't want to run out of money, and I think that's why people pay attention to this withdrawal percentage. But also, when you bump it up, you're talking about a significant amount of money that you can be spending and be enjoying your retirement with, rather than worrying, right? And that's a huge deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I don't think that somebody who isn't familiar with this is something that they can just implement themselves. Again, there's going to be listeners out here that have been doing things themselves, or math inclined, spreadsheet inclined, that might be able to take this and run with it and do some further research that's out there online that they can try to implement. I think the thing is, with working with an advisor, again, having that sounding board with the financial software needed, incorporating all these other things. Like, again, this is just kind of how much can I spend? It's not really taking into consideration, do you want to have a certain amount of money left behind to give to your kids, or leave a certain money behind in case tax laws change, health situation changes, stuff like that. It's not really taken into consideration if you're somebody who is a more aggressive investor or super conservative investor. These numbers would change. So it's important to make sure that you're, well equipped with this, or you should, seek out help here. But really the gist of this is to say that I think a lot of people are leaving money behind that they could have otherwise spent and enjoyed throughout their retirement. And I think that which way to go about it, I don't want to say it's a right or wrong, because sometimes the simplicity is the best way to go. The 4% rule kind of is maybe leave some money behind, but the other options do create a scenario where you might have to ratchet down. And some people in retirement would rather just have a lower starting number and not have to ever take kind of a pay cut. Some of these other methods, while in most of the scenarios allow you to spend more and more every year, do have a situation if things go awry where you might have to take a step back, back to a year or two, wherever that was, if markets are not as good. And so sometimes people might not, want to do that. The other thing, the starting withdrawal rate, I think is also important from the context of, we're not robots, we're humans, and life throws us curveballs. So if you're somebody who wants to, maximize this number, you might not be leaving much room for some of the what ifs, so to speak. If you need to if your budget's not in check, if you want to take all these extra distributions along the way, or we'll call it the wants and wishes bucket, taking the whole family to Disney World, taking the winter months, 3 months, and living in Florida where this is kind of beyond your typical standard withdrawal. So a financial planner will bake into these other assumptions to come up with a much more accurate starting number that might be a little bit different than what you're seeing here. Those are all those different what ifs to kind of plan for. So I think it's super important to really understand how much certainty you want in that kind of withdrawal number. Do you mind, some of that fluctuation up or down? And then kind of, is this something that you're able to take on yourself, or does it make more sense to speak to a professional? And I think that really this is just a highlight that there's a lot of different ways to go about it. And that, what has been popular as a starting point could be leaving some money on the table.
Yeah, it definitely is. I'm sure will pique the interest of a lot of people that are heading into retirement and wondering what they should be taking out. But also, it's somebody that wants to maybe spend a little bit more and knows, hey, there is some flexibility there beyond what we've traditionally believed with that 4% rule. So the best thing you can do is take advantage of that introductory conversation, hit that free assessment, begin that Cardinal success journey with Anthony and the team there at the Cardinal Wealth Group. You can find that at cardinalwg.com. The link is in the show description as well. We'll also drop the link to this article, just so if you really want to look into the numbers a little bit more, you'll find it there as well. Or reach out to Anthony to discuss this further if you have questions. But so important to be aware of this and to know that, hey, you might have a little bit more money to spend in retirement than maybe you expected before doing any planning. So that is the good news here. But either way, Anthony, just sit down, plan for it, know your numbers, understand what the income is going to look like in retirement, and make sure you get it right. But we appreciate your time as always, and thanks for breaking this down for us. It's really good information.
Thanks, Ben. Have a good day.
Information provided is for informational purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Please consult a qualified professional before taking any action.